The Bonebreaker is a female Nord between the ages of 15 and 25. Her mother died when she was very young, and the Bonebreaker has little memory of her. But what she does remember, she cherishes greatly, and the Bonebreaker loves her mother dearly. The Bonebreaker's father, on the other hand, was an abusive alcoholic. He worked as a sellsword, but spent all his money on drinks at taverns. He would often come home and beat his own daughter while drunk, despite her being a young girl. Thus, the Bonebreaker had little to live for as a child, but there were a few things in life that kept her going. First, her mother's diary, which told of her mother's many adventures. The Bonebreaker's mother dabbled in alteration and restoration, giving the Bonebreaker interest in these schools of magic. Second, her love of combat and one-handed weapons. The Bonebreaker would often sneak out at night with her father's mace after he had passed out in his drunken stupor and practiced swinging around the weapon. Seeing such a tiny girl struggle to wield a heavy weapon was comical at first, but over time the Bonebreaker grew strong and was able to wield the mace well for her age. Third, her love of smithing. The local blacksmith was a young man, and she would often watch as he forged weapons. Enamored with her beauty, the young blacksmith agreed to let her work in his forge, and taught her the art of smithing. He was the Bonebreaker's first true friend in life, and she cherished her time with him. But alas, he soon accepted a job in another hold, and the two were forced to part ways. As the Bonebreaker grew into a talented young woman, her father became jealous of her youth and skills. One fateful evening, he came back even more drunk than usual, and gave her a particularly violent beating. For the first time, the Bonebreaker retaliated against her father, shattering his jaw in an effort to protect herself. Her father cried out in pain and fell to the floor, clutching his disfigured face. He looked up at his daughter with derision and said, "If only I had killed that damn woman a few years earlier, then you would never have been born." Rage consumed the Bonebreaker at her father's revelation. The room's atmosphere grew cold as she took her father's mace and raised the weapon above her head. He looked on in horror, pleading with his daughter, but was met with cold eyes, utterly devoid of sympathy and happiness. Without hesitation, the Bonebreaker struck down her father with his own weapon, beating him for all the times he had beaten her. And by the time her father's disfigured body was found, she was already far away. For a time, the Bonebreaker wandered Skyrim and the neighboring provinces, visiting many places described in her mother's diary. But as fate would have it, she was one day caught in an Imperial ambush near Skyrim's border and taken to Helgen for execution. So began her journey as Dragonborn. The reason for Nord is the choice for this build is for roleplaying, frost resistance, and good starting skills. I recommend around 60% of your level ups towards health, 40% towards stamina, and 0% towards magicka. This probably seems strange, but we're later going to use Enchanting to reduce the cost of most important spells the Bonebreaker uses to 0, so magicka investment is actually not needed. The Bonebreaker's name derives from her brutal use of a one-handed mace to dispatch enemies. The primary skill she focuses on is one-handed, and she is proficient both in dual wielding and the use of a shield. When dual wielding, be sure to use a sword in the left hand and a mace in the right. This is because when dual wielding in Skyrim, the swing speed of your weapons depends only on what's in your left hand. So this combination will allow you to swing both weapons at the speed of a sword and maximize your DPS. You can also try a dagger in your left hand and a mace in your right, as this will allow for even faster swing speed. When you're not dual wielding, you should have a mace or sword in your right hand and a shield in your left. Here are all the one-handed perks you'll need for this build. All 5 stages of Armsman, both stages of Dual Flurry, Dual Savagery, Fighting Stance, Savage Strike, and Paralyzing Strike. Ironically, Bonebreaker, Bladesman, and Hack and Slash are useless, so don't get these perks. The next major skill for the Bonebreaker is Smithing. If you have the Dawnguard DLC, take the left path up the perk tree, as this will cost you fewer perks in the long run. Once you get Dragon Smithing, craft and improve a Dragonbone Mace, a Dragonbone Sword, and a full set of Dragon Scale armor. If you don't have Dawnguard, take the right path of the perk tree, because you can't make Dragonbone weapons without this DLC, so you'll have to use Daedric weapons and Dragon Scale armor. Yet another important skill for the Bonebreaker is Restoration. The main spell you'll be using is Close Wounds, which restores 150 points of health and 100 points of stamina with the appropriate perks. The following restoration perks are required: Novice Restoration, Respite, and Regeneration. Avoid Death and Restoration dual casting can also be helpful, but aren't essential. Don't bother with the Apprentice, Adept, Expert, and Master Restoration perks because Enchanting is going to reduce spell cost to 0 anyways. Next up we have Alteration. The main Alteration spells you'll be using are Paralyze and Mass Paralysis. While your enemy is paralyzed, you can take out your mace and sword in a dual wielding combination and deal absurd amounts of damage with dual wield power attacks. This method is extremely overpowered and renders any enemy that can be paralyzed completely powerless. Alteration is also useful for dealing with magic via the perks Atronach and Magic Resistance. In light of all this, you'll want the following perks: Novice Alteration, Apprentice Alteration, all 3 stages of Magic Resistance, Adept Alteration, Stability, Expert Alteration, Master Alteration, and Atronach. The next major skill for the Bonebreaker is Enchanting. Pick up all 5 stages of Enchanter, Insightful Enchanter, Corpus Enchanter, and Extra Effect. Once you've done this, enchant your Dragon Scale armor with the following enchantments. If you have 100 Enchanting and all of the necessary perks, this combination of enchantments will boost one-handed attacks, make it so that all restoration spells cost 0 magicka, and all alteration spells cost around half magicka. I want to emphasize that it's very important you enchant your gauntlets with Fortify Magicka, because with 100 Alteration, all the necessary perks, and this enchantment setup, Mass Paralysis costs just over 100 Magicka. With this Fortify Magicka enchantment, we can make casting it possible. The next main skill is Light Armor. You're going to want the following perks: 1 stage of Agile Defender, Custom Fit, Unhindered, Windwalker, Matching Set, and Deft Movement. The other perks are not recommended because Skyrim has an armor cap beyond which additional armor rating does nothing, and with these perks along with max smithing, you should be able to easily hit the armor cap. The last important skill for the Bonebreaker is Block. I find Block to be very overpowered and highly recommended. The shield you should use is Spellbreaker because it will allow you to block magic attacks. With regards to perks, I recommend getting every single perk in the tree by some point in the game. The right side of the tree will allow you to perform deadly bash attacks that stagger your enemy and make any sort of close combat easy. The left side of the tree will help to deal with arrows, protect against magic, and increase mobility. Finally, we have Shield Charge, which is a light combination of Unrelenting Force and Paralysis. After knocking down your enemy with Shield Charge, you can pull out your dual wield setup and destroy them in an instant. Make sure to have Block Runner before picking up this perk, or you won't be able to sprint while blocking, making this perk useless. Interestingly, bashing and shield charging require at least 1 stamina, so a very effective strategy is to make tons of vegetable soup. This will regenerate 1 point of stamina per second for 12 minutes, and ensures that you have at least 1 stamina to perform a shield bash or charge. Optional skills that can complement the Bonebreaker's abilities well are Alchemy and Conjuration, but prioritize these after the main skills. Now let's discuss dealing with magic. Your character already has high physical damage resistance, and if you follow these steps, she will have high magic resistance as well. First, acquire Spellbreaker. While blocking with Spellbreaker, the shield erects a ward that gives protection against magic, and is incredibly useful for dealing with pretty much all types of magic. It also works well alongside the Elemental Protection perk, but keep in mind that these effects are only active while blocking. From here, choose the Lord Stone as your standing stone for 25% magic resistance, get all 3 stages of the magic resistance perk at 10% each, and complete the Book of Love quest at the Temple of Mara in Riften for 15% magic resistance. This will give you 70% resistance to all types of magic, which multiplicatively stacks with a 50% resistance to frost and fire. The end result is an 85% resistance to frost and fire magic, and a 70% resistance to shock magic. Combine this with the effects of Spellbreaker and you're essentially invulnerable to magic so long as you use your shield correctly. Achieving the optimal setup with this character is not too difficult and can be done anytime after you have 100 smithing, 100 enchanting, and all of the necessary perks for these skills. First, stock up on Grand Soul Gems. You'll need a total of 12. Obtain the Fortify Smithing enchantment and enchant any necklace, any chest piece, any ring, and any gauntlets with Fortify Smithing using Grand Soul Gems for the maximum effect. After this, create and improve a Dragonbone mace, a Dragonbone sword or dagger, and a full set of Dragon Scale armor. Now obtain the Fortify One-Handed, Fortify Alteration, Fortify Restoration, and Resist Fire enchantments. Enchant your Dragon Scale armor with the enchantments shown on screen using Grand Soul Gems. Acquire Spellbreaker by completing a quest called The Only Cure, which can be started by talking to a Khajiit at the Shrine to Periite. Follow the steps mentioned earlier to get a 70% natural resistance to all magic. Finally, acquire any major perks that you haven't gotten already, and you're good to go. To end off this video, let's talk about how to use this character. When dealing with enemies, the first thing you should try is paralysis spells. For a large group of enemies, use Mass Paralysis, and for small groups, use Paralyze. Be sure to use the Become Ethereal shout when you're casting Mass Paralysis, or it may be difficult to get the spell off. Once you've paralyzed your enemy, pull out your mace and sword, then use dual-wield power attacks to destroy them while paralyzed. In most cases, you'll be able to defeat all enemies in just seconds without taking any damage. If your enemy is immune to paralysis attacks, then pull out a one-handed weapon in your right hand and Spellbreaker in your left hand. Use a combination of bashing, shield charging, and attacks from your one-handed weapon to dispatch the enemy. This setup works incredibly well because the most notable enemies that are immune to paralysis are dragons and dragon priests, but both are rendered powerless by Spellbreaker. Anytime you get low on health, pull out Close Wounds and spam the spell until you're back up to full. Because restoration spells cost 0 magicka, you can pretty much keep restoring your health over and over without having to worry about running out of magicka. Overall, this build is very overpowered if used correctly, and the best part is it doesn't require you to really invest in that many perks. It's certainly a lot easier to achieve the optimal setup with this character than any of my previous builds. But maybe some of you out there disagree, and if that's the case, I'm definitely open to suggestions for improving the build. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.